So I was at the dentist today, and at one point the dentist asked me to bite down normally. And for a moment, I had this existential crisis where I didn't know how to bite down. How do you bite down normally? What is normal when you bite down? I never bite down consciously. I bite and I think to bite, but I don't think to how I move my jaw. But when you've got like a bunch of things in your mouth and like people looking down at you and this bright light shining in your face, all of a sudden you don't know how to bite down. Needless to say, I figured out how to bite down normally, but it made me think, what else is there that we just take for granted and don't actually think about and consider just to be the way it is? And does that work with wargaming as well? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek video. Today I want to talk about the things that we kind of take for granted in Warhammer, specifically Warhammer. You can expand it out into wargaming, but some of the things I'm going to talk about are very specific to Warhammer. And they're very specific to Warhammer because it's the way things have been with them since the beginning, since Rogue Trader. And these are things that have kept going and continued the way they have for many, many years, and we kind of just take them for rote that this is how it is and this is the way it's meant to be because it's the way it is. And I want to talk about some of these thoughts, and they're not necessarily ways that we are going to change Warhammer itself, but it's something to keep in mind, to think about when we keep talking about how do we improve Warhammer, how do we change the game, how do we change the paradigm of what it is to be in the far-flung future of the grim, dark future. And part of it makes you have to think outside of what we have taken for rote as the way things have to be. The first thing I want to talk about is the barest thing that you need for the game, which is dice. Everything comes down to dice. It doesn't matter if you are advancing, it doesn't matter if you are shooting, fighting, saving, anything. You have dice. And traditionally, Warhammer has used D6 system. So you just use a certain number of D6s, looking for a certain value on those D6s, and you get a number. The problem with this is that you only ever have 6 values. So how you vary those values, you're limited in what you can do. Especially when you have 1s always fail and 6s always succeed. The variance that you're ever going to have between anything is usually 2 through 5. And that means that you have very little variance that you can get from the actual dice deciding your RNG, your randomness. And you need to find ways to figure out how to do it differently. So you either increase the number of dice that you use, you make the value that you add onto the dice higher, so you have, 15 D6s, or you have 1 D6 plus 5, and suddenly now you have a higher value that you're guaranteed, and you base everything around that. But the barest randomness that you're dealing with is limited. And as a nerd who started and got his teeth started with role-playing, there are a whole lot of different dice out there. Anyone who's played Infinity also knows that you have different-sided dice that they use for theirs, D20 in that system. I played World of Darkness role-playing, so like Vampire the Masquerade and such, that used a D10 system. Anyone who's done Dungeons and Dragons knows that they have the whole gambit of dice, from the D20 system down to the number of the type of dice that you roll for damage on certain weapons. So like I was going to say power sword, like a long sword is like a D8 and such like that. So there's a whole lot of different dice you could do, and the second you get into higher dice values, like a D10. All of a sudden now you have much more variance that you can get. So you can have like a bolt pistol, you can have a better bolt pistol, and you can have a perfect bolt pistol, and they can all work still within a range that doesn't mean that they're essentially shooting at the same thing as like a las cannon. And that becomes important when you're trying to figure out ways to micro-balance a game system, like we currently seem to see ourselves in with Warhammer 40k. we're trying to find balance in a game that is inherently unbalanced and that is going to have these imbalances just based upon the fact that you have so many different armies doing so many different things with so many different special rules that if you're trying to micro-balance them down into a place where they interact the way you want them to on the table and neither side has an inherent advantage, then having more of a range that you can work with would help with that. So if suddenly we are rolling d10s instead of d6s, it becomes easier to do so, to figure out that difference in there. There are detriments that come with this. You know, suddenly we can't just buy a brick of dice. D10s, d20s don't pile up as neatly as d6s do. D6s are also very prevalent throughout the world of gaming and beyond. You know, you have d6s even in normies when they're playing craps. You've got, you know, you're not going to find d20s in Vegas, for instance. And a lot of board games use d6s because they don't need that kind of micro variance in effect, because they just need to have a result for everybody doing basically the exact same thing. So d6s have become the default in many ways for a lot of game systems and a lot of game things because of their ubiquitousness and the fact that they are easier to pack up into a nice little cube that you can take with you, and it makes it work that way. But we don't have to. And a lot of games out there, like I said, Infinity for one, D&D for other, use dice with different face values and a different number of face values to achieve different effects. And it could work in Warhammer, but it would require like a major rethink of how the system works and how things go with it. So that is one thing that we have taken for granted with Warhammer that we don't think about doing when we talk about trying to find balance or trying to do whatever. And there's an understanding there. I do not foresee that 10th edition will be a D10 system or D20 system, but it's something to keep in mind, and hold yourself open that if even the barest thing that the most basic thing that has been in every edition, these D6s, if suddenly they were able to change, if you kept your mind open to them being able to change, it opens up a lot more doors for you to rethink a lot of other things and how they work, you know? And that's important. That's important to keep your mind open to these things if you really want to sit back and go, what can we do to change the game? Another thing to think about is just scale. You know, right now we work on the 28 millimeter scale or so, or the 32 millimeter scale, about that too. The normal size, again, that we think about when we talk about miniatures for miniature wargaming, size that we work with. And a lot of the other systems, they have heroic scale and they have normal scale, but they often very much work within that realm. I recently did a battle report where I used Kill Team game and rules, but with double-sized models. Like, these are cool. These are huge. And they're really awesome to have, like, an awesome little thing that's bigger and you can move them around. It's almost like working with, like, a bunch of dreadnoughts, except, like, the whole game system is based upon it. And what we did was the models were just double-sized, and therefore the table just became double-sized. So the rules all could stay the same, but suddenly you have bigger models, and you're playing on a bigger table, so it doesn't quite work the same if you're trying to do it in your, you know, if you're trying to do it somewhere where they can't have like a, you know, like a 4x6 or so, about 4x6 table. But if you just double size it up, if you've got the gaming table in your, you know, house or basement or whatever, or gaming store, you can play it on the same game size that you would a normal 40K game, except you can do Kill Team. So you have a less number of models to keep in mind. It makes it a bit more simpler when you're trying to work out and maneuver with them. By just changing the scale that the game works in, it changes the way you kind of view the game. So as opposed to being like crouched over the small table and the small board with your models moving like that, all of a sudden you pull back and you're looking at an entire board with just like 5 or 6 models from your side on it. And it changes the way you think about things. It changes the way you look at things. I don't know if that quite portrayed across in the video, but in actual gaming, it became very cool to see something so different like that and play with something so different like that. And the reason I think it's important to think about these things is not that I think that the next edition of Kill Team should be double-sized models. It's not that I think that the next edition of Warhammer 40K should be a D10 system. But it's important to understand that just because something is, does not mean that something should be, or something has to be. And the more we can open our minds up to these kind of drastic changes, like a scale size change or a dice type change, the more we hold ourselves open to be able to change smaller things, like how we interact with different weapons, or how different unit sizes work, or how many models should be in a unit size, or how many points we should play on each side, or how many models we should expect those points to equate to for each side. So yes, we sit back and, and orc players expect to roll an entire bucket of dice when they play with that. And it carries on for quite a few hours of play. But if you were playing a smaller number of models on the table, the game's going to go shorter. But we have it in our brains that the game should have a certain epicness to it. And we stick with that because that's what we've gone with. When people try to expand it too far, you get into those apocalypse games, and they can go on for days. And there are certain people that really enjoy giant-sized games like that, like a giant apocalypse-sized game. To me, it's a bit overwhelming. It's a bit too much. There's too many things going on the table. It doesn't really work on the granular level that a lot of the game systems work at, and it becomes a lot to me. And I don't have the attention span to be able to keep my mind going on the same exact game for like 2-3 days straight. But some people really love that. Kill Team, for me, is lovely. I love it. It's small. The number of models that I'm playing with are smaller, which is like with any skirmish game. But sometimes I feel like I want to have something in between. And there seems to be very little of that. I know that they've been pushing a lot of the 500-point level games, 1,000-point level games, and whatever. And I've played those. I have. But there's like an expectation that people have that when we say, I'm going to play a game of 40K, that I'm going to bring 2,000 points. And we always talk about that. It's like when you can start it, but you just need a 2,000 point army and you're good to go. And the whole idea of like the patrol detachment and stuff like that, when you start off with 500 points, it's meant to be a stepping tool to get you to a full army. I think that the more we examine everything we do in these games, the more we examine what we take for granted and take as rote as has to happen in these games, the more we're going to find ourselves with answers or questions that we don't have answers for. It's like, why do you do this? Because we have. Why should you do this? I don't know. And there is no answer often to many of these questions. Same thing with the dice size or the models, the scale size that we're working with here. Other than the fact that it's cheaper to make a smaller model than it is to make a bigger model, there's no reason we shouldn't be at a different scale size. Just because it's easier to pack the dice doesn't mean that means you have to do it, because other games have done it without that and you just put it into a bag. That's why you look at D&D stuff, everybody has their cool dice bag. And that becomes like a point of like pride for a lot of people to have their dice bag. And even in 40K, people bring their dice bags of D6s as opposed to necessarily like a little cube of them. So if it can be done, then why shouldn't it be done? And if you can't say why it shouldn't be done, and you can't say how it's done currently is the better way to do it, then maybe it's worth thinking about. Let me know down below what things that are taken for rote, taken for granted, and taken as just the way it has to be because it has been doing that way in 40K that you find needs to change. It could be in AOS too. I don't have as much experience with fantasy, and I mean that was a huge departure that they went with, as opposed to rank and file. They went into the individual models, much more like a 40K system. I didn't know that was what they changed over to from the rank and file, but taking fantasy to that was a big change in and of itself. So, and there have been a lot of people that have been big fans of AOS. There's a lot of people that certainly miss the rank and file and miss the old fantasy system. And I have rumors. I mean, they talked about it coming back with the square bases and everything like that. So maybe they'll scratch that itch there. But the question then becomes, what have we taken for granted that we do now that you don't think has to be that way, but no one really talks about, no one really considers because it's just the way it has been. So let me know down below what you think, and if you think that this is something that I'm just crazy about. Am I still feeling the after effects of the Novocaine? Or do I have something that actually kind of hits an itch there? So let me know down below what you think, and we can continue this conversation. So I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I did that in the wrong order. I'm going to keep going with it. So until next time, stay safe and have fun.